Mishknosecha Yisrael, Yisrael, Vani berov chazdecha, Avo veisecha, Eshtachave, El heichal kodshecha. Ratzon Elohim Aneini be'emes Yishecha be'emes Yishecha.
Good evening to everyone. My name's Rabbi Annie Tucker. I'm the rabbi here at Beth Hillel Congregation B'nai Emunah. And it's my pleasure to welcome everyone here tonight to our synagogue, and especially to welcome us here for this wonderful program in commemoration of the 75th anniversary of Kristallnacht. Rabbis love to tell stories, and so I'm going to tell a very brief story before our program begins. And this story is about a group of students who gathered together years ago to talk about how to confront the problem of darkness. One student said, when confronted with darkness, let's take a bat and let's try to beat the darkness, and in that way we'll scare it away. The second student said, no, let's scream at the darkness, and if we just yell loud enough, the darkness will be scared into oblivion. And then the third student said, let us meet the darkness with light. And if the darkness is confronted with bright light, it will have no choice but to recede. So I think of that story this evening as we confront some very dark times in our people's history and our world's history, that perhaps the best thing that we can do is to confront that darkness with the light of education and the light of tolerance and the light of community, and that's what we've come to do here this evening. So thank you for being here. Welcome so much to our community, and enjoy the program.
Thank you and good evening, and Shavua Tov. Each year, when we remember the night of shattered glass, Kristallnacht, our conscience is awoken when we pick up our newspaper in the morning, the Chicago Tribune, or the Chicago Sun-Times, or Chicago Jewish News, or the JUF News, always because of the singular focus of one of our esteemed event organizers this evening, Al Gruen. And I want to take a moment now, because I'm not sure it will happen later in the program, I don't want the opportunity lost to say a few words about the experience and how important it has been for Al and for all of us to be able to come together this evening. When you open that newspaper, just as you did earlier this week, there's a very large ad, an advertisement, a statement, a clarion call to remember. It is a jolt. It is not long on words, but it is very strong on message of however many years ago these terrible events that have come to be known as Kristallnacht, as the turning point in the chronology and the sequence of the Holocaust, occurred during those terrible hours. And we are called to pause and remember. Tonight is a special remembrance, the 75th anniversary. And so, beyond merely absorbing that message, that powerful and poignant message that appears each and every year, tonight we gather as a community, a strong community, in a room, in a beautiful sanctuary that was necessitated because at the Illinois Holocaust Museum and Education Center, as magnificent and as remarkable a place of learning and inspiration and hope as one could imagine, we would not have been able to accommodate all of you. Al Gruen's vision and his early prediction that we would need this magnificent hall tonight came true. And that's a testament to the power of memory and to the sheer will and goodness of this singular individual. I would be remiss if I did not also add the very special partnership that Manny Steinfeld, Manny and Fern, who are with us tonight, the friendship that goes back many, many decades between Al and Manny in making tonight possible. And I share it with you because as much as this is a look back tonight, from the vantage point of the museum, this is also a look forward. For us at the museum, it is always about looking back, but looking back with an eye toward thinking about how we continue to repair and make a difference in the world today. For us, that is the significance of Kristallnacht at 75, and that same significance will carry forward. We are honored and privileged to be a co-sponsor, a co-host of tonight's commemoration, and we are so grateful that all of you are here. Thank you.
It is a great honor to be here. Thank you for inviting me. I want to thank the Illinois Holocaust Museum. I want to thank the Jewish United Federation for helping to bring this night. To the Gruen family, to Al, to Manfred and Fern Steinfeld, thank you for making this possible. I also want to thank and recognize my dear friend, Richard Hirschhout. Richard has made an incredible institution at the Illinois Holocaust and Education Museum. I'm going to miss you. Our community is going to miss you, but I wish you luck. I want to thank the Attorney General, Lisa Madigan, for being here tonight. I want to thank all of our distinguished guests and speakers for their wisdom, their leadership, and their perspectives. Finally, let me thank everyone here at Beth Hillel Congregation B'nai Emunah for hosting us this evening. We're here this evening as a community commemorating a tragic milestone 75 years ago tonight. Kristallnacht, the night of the broken glass, November 9th and 10th, 1938, was a wake-up call in the context of one of the darkest periods of our people's and the world's history. The horror unfolded in the streets, in neighborhoods, in houses of worship, and in homes. Shards of glass piling up, the screams of children and families. Blood soaked the ground, fear surrounded, but yet there were no sirens. There was no one coming to help. We know the physical toll. 267 synagogues destroyed, more than 7,500 Jewish businesses vandalized, 91 Jews murdered, 30,000 Jews seized and forced to concentration camps. Kristallnacht sent a message across Europe that war was being waged on the Jews. No one was safe, and all lived in fear. Kristallnacht should have been a moment that the world stood up, stood to attention, and confronted the horrors that were being and would be perpetrated by the Nazis and their allies. Many saw, but many did not, and many, too many, hesitated. It would be 7 more years before the full horror of the Nazi killing machine was appreciated, and we first uttered the words, "Never again." We defeated the Nazis and the Allies in World War II, but the hatred that inspired Kristallnacht is still alive today. Today, the Jews in places around the world face the threat of discrimination and hatred. These forces of evil are no different fundamentally than those that perpetrated the acts of terror 75 years ago tonight. The modern face of anti-Semitism is harder to define and harder to identify. There's no single organization operating under a unified banner. But the lessons of Kristallnacht are still tragically relevant today. Not just about anti-Semitism, but hate in general, hate ripping the very fabric of nations. Today, at this moment, in fact, as we speak, however, the greatest threat, without question, is a nuclear Iran. My wife Julie and I were in Israel as part of a 37-member congressional delegation this summer. It was the largest such delegation ever to Israel. There we heard Amos Yadlin, the former head of security, speak, and he put it this way: the only existential threat to Israel is the marriage of extremist ideology set on the destruction of Israel and nuclear technology. That is why we must not allow Iran to have a pathway to nuclear weapons capability. Not now, not ever. My friends, the hate and evil that inspired Kristallnacht is still alive today, and we simply cannot accept its existence. After Kristallnacht, the world was disgusted. President Roosevelt condemned the events, but 6 million Jews were still murdered in the Holocaust. The lesson we painfully learned, the lesson that the Illinois Holocaust Museum and Education Center passionately teaches, is that never again can this evil be perpetrated against humanity. That is the lesson of Kristallnacht. That is the lesson of the Holocaust. That is the lesson we must all apply today across the world. And that is the modern relevance of this anniversary. Never again is now. Thank you. Shalom.
Good evening. I appreciate the Illinois Holocaust Museum and the Jewish Federation and Al Grun for bringing us together for this necessary commemoration of one of the most devastating events in modern history. The violence and destruction the Nazis perpetrated on Jewish people and institutions during Kristallnacht signaled a turning point in the Nazi regime's ongoing policy of exclusionary legislation and ostracizing German and Austrian Jews. Afterward, neither the people in Germany nor anywhere else in the world could deny the true intent of the Nazis, the total destruction of the Jewish people. While the Nazis' massive coordinated attacks shocked the world, they also should have made clear that the Nazi regime could not be allowed to continue in its persecution of Jews. This is one of the important reasons we come together tonight, to remember that acts of cruelty and violence can eventually lead to the unspeakable, the horrors of mass persecution, and that the tactics the Nazis employed during Kristallnacht didn't just destroy Jewish synagogues and shops and schools. They also destroyed minds. Because over those 2 days, the Nazis effectively installed fear into the entire German population. Afterwards, people were terrified to act because they feared what might happen to them or their families if they stood up or spoke out for their Jewish friends and neighbors. So too many people simply stood by, or worse, they joined the ranks of the persecutors. We must come together tonight to remember these tragic events and also commit to learning their lessons. First, never again to the persecution of Jewish people. Also, never again to the persecution of any religious minority. Unfortunately, we still witness similar acts of terror being used around the world. They are used by governments hoping to stamp out people who do not agree with them. They are used by organizations whose power relies on keeping other people oppressed. But they are also used right here in the United States, sometimes by children in schools, sometimes by adults in workplaces. And when we ignore or we tolerate bullying or hate crimes, we risk greater persecution by putting liberty and justice at risk for all of us. So I am very proud that we stand together tonight as people of different faiths and different races in recognition of our common humanity. 75 years after these terrible events, our presence here makes it clear that religious persecution cannot succeed if we know our history, stand together, speak out, and take action. We will always mourn and remember the millions of innocent lives that were lost during the Holocaust, and we are committed to doing all that we can to ensure that it never happens again. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I am proud and humbled to be here tonight. Thank you very much, Mr. Gruen, for asking me. I am Dr. Robert Pickard, and I am an ear, nose, and throat doctor from Miami, Florida. I am a retired, I'm a retired colonel in the U.S. Army Medical Corps. I served during the Vietnam era as a doctor, and for about 28 years after that in the Florida Army National Guard. And I was born here in Chicago, so I'm a Yankee by birth, but I'm Southern by the grace of God and the Florida National Guard. Now, I'd like to ask your favors here. If anybody is here who's a World War II veteran, I know if you can't stand up, just salute at your seat, but please do stand up. In fact, any veteran from any conflict, please stand up now and be recognized. But anyway, I want to thank Mr. Gruen and the rest, the rabbis, bishop, congresspeople. Thank you for allowing me to speak. This whole event is very humbling. It must be. It's, after all, the 75th anniversary of Kristallnacht. Great euphemism that the Nazis like to use, like the final solution to the Jewish problem, right? Kristallnacht, broken glass, broken hearts, broken dreams. But there's something that doesn't break. The diamond, that's what the symbol of a 75th anniversary is, right? It's a hard substance. And it comes from the Greek adamos, meaning indestructible, eternal, like us Jews. What is the secret of the Jews' immortality? Mark Twain asked that question, and he mused and answered it himself. And I'll quote, if you don't mind. The Egyptian, the Babylonian, and the Persian rose, filled the planet with sound and splendor, then faded to dream stuff and passed away. The Greek and Roman followed and made a vast noise, and they are gone. Other peoples have sprung up and held their torch high for a time, but it burned out, and they sit in twilight now, or have vanished. The Jew saw them all, beat them all, and is now what he always was, exhibiting no decadence, no infirmities of age, no weakening of his parts, no slowing of his energies, no dulling of his alert and aggressive mind. All things are mortal, but the Jew. All other forces pass, but he remains. What is the secret of his immortality, Twain asks. And the answer, of course, is God's grace on us. Shehekiyanu v'kiyimanu v'higiyanu azman hazeh. How fortunate are we to be part of those kept alive by Hashem from the ashes, from the crematoria, from the gas chambers, to bear witness to history and to our children's children and teach our children's children. Thank you, Hashem, for allowing us, your people, Israel, to rise from the ashes above the shambles of European Jewry. And thank you, God, for the veterans who helped make that possible. Nevertheless, we cannot here or anywhere commemorate, honor, extol those whose lives were shattered by the Holocaust. There are 6 million sacrifices way beyond any extollations and commemorations that we here or anywhere else can invoke. But let us rather look to a bright and hopeful future, Hatikva, learning from the past and joining together to strengthen one another and continue the good fight as brothers and sisters against anti-Semitism, racial bigotry, and hatred. And let us say, Amen. Thank you.
Avinu Malkeinu, our Father, our King, Shema Kolenu, listen to our voice. Avinu Malkeinu, Shema Kolenu, Avinu Malkeinu, Chatanu lefanecha, Avinu Malkeinu, Chamal aleinu, ve'alol aleinu, ve'tapeinu.
Avinu Malkeinu, Kadei Tevet, Vecherev Rav, Emei Aleinu. Avinu Malkeinu, Kadei Chol Tzar, Umastin, Mei Aleinu.
Avinu Malkeinu, Avinu Malkeinu, Katveinu, Besefer Chaim Tovim, Avinu Malkeinu, Kadesh Aleinu, Kadesh Aleinu, Shana Tova.
Avinu Malkeinu, Avinu Malkeinu, Kadesh Aleinu, Shana Tova. Avinu Malkeinu, Shema Kolenu, Shema Kolenu.
in addition to the people that you are here speaking tonight, this event could not be put on without the wonderful assistance of many of the event co-sponsors. Most of these folks are here today, maybe a couple are not, and I thought it would be appropriate before we moved on to say thank you to some of these people. They include Sandy Frum, who is the president of the Village of Northbrook, Jack Hyman, who is a major contributor to the perpetual Kristallnacht remembrance, Fred Kugler, who is the president of the Village of Northfield, Jesse White, of course, the Illinois Secretary of State, State Representative Lou Lang and State Representative Elaine Nykritz, Jerry Turry, who is the mayor of Lincolnwood, Anthony Calderon, the mayor of Forest Park, and Terry Wepler, the mayor of Libertyville. We have a lot of mayors today. George Van Usen, who is the mayor of the Village of Skokie, Bob Belinsky, the president of Wilmette, and finally Elizabeth Tisdale, the mayor of the city of Evanston. Our next spokesperson will obviously bring another very important and interesting perspective. He is the Honorable Dr. Christian Brecht, who is the Consul General of the Federal Republic of Germany for the Middle West.
Good evening. First of all, thank you very much for including me in this very moving commemoration, Chairman Mr. Alkuin. Thank you. November 9 has for Germany and for Germans different meanings. It marked in 1918 the end of World War I, the proclamation of the Weimar Republic, and its very difficult beginning. In 1989, it was the day of the fall of the Berlin Wall, a joyful event that was at the origin of democratic reforms in Eastern European countries and changed the course of history. But November 9, 1938 is a very mournful occasion that fills Germans with sadness and shame. This day has been, is, and will always be a day to contemplate, to remember, and to learn from the painful past. I'm humbled and honored, ladies and gentlemen, to join in this commemoration together with you, the Jewish American community here in the Beit Hillel congregation. And I take it as a sign of hope and as an expression of trust into my country. On the night of November 9, 1938, the Nazis mounted a coordinated attack, setting fire to nearly all synagogues in Germany, ransacking and destroying Jewish property, leaving the streets covered in shattered glass. Kristallnacht. It marked the shift from a policy of discrimination and exclusion of Jews to one of deportation, destruction, and murder. Today, 75 years later, Germans all over the world remember the unspeakable suffering that was brought on Europe, the world, and especially on the Jewish people. We remember and grieve for the victims and honor the few survivors. What lessons have we learned from the pogrom of November 9? Kristallnacht has a vital relevance for us today, especially in Germany. It is not only about remembrance and commemoration, but also about education. Education is key to grasping what happened and why it must never happen ever again. It has therefore become an integral part of German school curriculum to teach our children about this darkest part of German history and to introduce them to Jewish life and customs. In view of a growing anti-Semitism in Europe, also in Germany, these efforts will be strengthened by more education, by more information about Jewish life, and also, for example, by more exchange programs between Israel and Germany. That is also why it's so important that we have places like Yad Vashem, the US Holocaust Museum, the Holocaust Memorial located at the heart of Berlin, and the nearby Illinois Holocaust Museum. Thank you for having organized this moving commemoration.
Grant us peace, thy most precious gift, O thou eternal source of peace, and enable our nation to be a messenger of peace unto the peoples of the earth. Bless our country, that it may ever be a stronghold of peace, and the advocate of peace in the council of nations. May contentment reign within its borders, health and happiness within its homes. Strengthen the bonds of friendship and fellowship among all the inhabitants of our land. Plant virtue in every soul, and may the love of thy name hallow every home and every heart. Praised be thou, O Lord, giver of peace. Praised be thou, O Lord, giver of peace.
Good evening. It is indeed a privilege to be here with you tonight. I'm a Catholic Sister of Mercy, and I have been involved with working and serving and sharing life for 44 years with children and adults who are mentally and physically challenged. We really have a beautiful Misericordia family, and we're proud to say that we have and we share life with 50 families that are Jewish at Misericordia. And they add so much to our families, like Nancy and Jerry Turi, like Senator Carol out there. So many Jewish people have enriched our lives at Misericordia, and we're so grateful. You know, thinking about tonight, I really thought very seriously how terrible it is when people are regarded as so insignificant that they can be victimized the way the Jewish people were. But before the Jewish people were victimized, the Nazis really took the mentally ill, the developmentally disabled, anyone who didn't fit in to their idea of the master race, and began killing them and persecuting them. And there wasn't a general outcry. Why would this be done? Many of them were used to perfect the gas chambers that were going to be used to murder millions of Jewish people. But I've often thought, why wasn't there a terrible reaction when people with disabilities and illnesses were put in such positions of being regarded as disposable? We have to be careful of that in our country. Please God, you know, for years people with disabilities have been treated as objects of pity, objects of ridicule, objects of condescension. And today there's a growing reality that people with disabilities have a lot to bring to our community, and thank God they're appreciating it. You know, as I said, I'm Catholic. So we like saints. We really enjoy our saints. The Irish have St. Patrick's Day and St. Patrick's, who was a saint, and it's used to celebrate very heartily. The Germans have St. Boniface. The English have their saint, and I could go through every nationality and tell you about the saints. One of my favorite saints is Edith Stein. Edith Stein. Edith was born in Germany into a very successful merchant family and very Orthodox Jewish family. She was a brilliant, brilliant woman, and she went on and became a doctor of philosophy. And through her studies, she lost her faith, and she claimed that she was an atheist. After a while, she found something in the Catholic faith, and she actually became a Carmelite nun. And in 1942, the bishops of Holland, first she lived in Germany, and to safeguard her from the Nazis, they sent her to Holland. And in 1942, the Catholic bishops of Holland spoke out forcefully at their pulpits at Sunday Mass against what the Nazis were doing to the Jewish people. The Nazis became so angry that they began murdering all the Catholic Jews. And there were thousands of Catholic Jews that died before the general population of people, of Jewish people that died, because of this very strong reaction by the Nazis to what these bishops did in Holland. So Edith Stein, who became Sister Teresa, was martyred. She was martyred for her Jewish blood and for her Catholic religion. And she was canonized a saint in 1998 by Pope John Paul II, and she is one of my favorite saints. And she found so much in Christianity, and she says the roots are in Judaism. And sometimes we really forget how closely Christianity is to Judaism. And I'm proud to say that when I see the people on Devon Avenue walking to their synagogue every Saturday with their families, I am so proud of the witness that they are giving to our society, that how much they believe in their God and they're willing to publicly show it. So thank God for all the Jewish people who are so close to God and carry on this beautiful tradition. Thank you.
Honorable Congressman Schneider, Honorable Attorney General Madigan, Honorable Consul General Dr. Brecht, Mr. Hirschaut, distinguished guests, good evening. I'm honored to be here and represent the State of Israel, and I'm very excited because both of my grandfathers fought against the Nazis. My grandfather Elimelech and Anatoly, they fought in the Red Army during the Soviet Union. So we're very excited to be here in this distinguished and special event. Of course, as same as you, I wish that the Kristallnacht never would have occurred 75 years ago, but since it did, we must remember this evening and continue to memorialize it. There are some lessons to be learned, and I would like to share with you some of them. The first one is the red lines. In the modern world, there is sometimes confusion and conflict between different views and positions, theories which try to explain that everything is relative to where you were born, what you study, which cultural heritage you share, and I think it's wrong. Every country, each society, and each person has to establish a red line which guides us. Glasses broken at the Kristallnacht, synagogues were burned, the Jewish lives which were taken, all those were a red line. A huge red line forecasting the upcoming disaster. Today, we have to decide what our red lines. Today we have to decide what our red lines are, and we need to put them before those who threaten us, those who threaten our values, those who threaten our lives. We have to articulate and define and also demonstrate our red lines, those that cannot be crossed. Is anyone here thinking about the Iranian nuclear military program? The second lesson is the memory. Our memory. Most of my adult life I spent in Jerusalem. I studied there in the high school and after it in the Hebrew University. Every year I used to visit the Holocaust Museum, Yad Vashem. I did it during the Memorial Day to the victims of the Holocaust. Every year at this very day, many Holocaust survivors arrive to the museum to tell their stories. They share their experience, their thoughts, their life story. They're shared with the visitors. Their stories, together with the special atmosphere in the museum, made huge impact on me. Naturally, the number of the survivors decreased every year. As long as their generation passes away, the need for preserving the memory grows greater and stronger. The burden and the responsibility to keep the memory is passed from the survivors' generations to ours, and each of us has to share the memory with the next generations. We have to remember our history, the horror of the Holocaust, to prevent any chance that another Kristallnacht will happen. And the last lesson, the third one, is the importance of Israel to the security of the Jewish people. As we all know, the Jews' situation at 1938 is not even close to the situation today. In 1938, the Jews didn't have the ability to defend themselves. There were no one who can help and defend them. 75 years later, the Jews has their own state, the State of Israel, an independent, democratic state which has the ability to defend her citizens. More than that, Israel sees herself as the main protector for the Jews all over the world. That is the main reason why any anti-Semite forces will refrain from harm any Jewish community wherever it is. The State of Israel approaching other governments in order to create a safer environment in those cases where when she sensed the community has no sufficient protection. The existence of the State of Israel ensures that the concept never again will be passed on from one generation to another. Thank you very much.
Good evening. My name is Wayne Miller, and I serve, as you have heard, as the Bishop of the Metropolitan Chicago Synod of the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America, which means that this evening I bring you greetings not only from myself, but from some 100,000 souls in the counties of Cook, Kane, DuPage, and Lake County that worship in the 200 congregations that make up our synod. Truthfully, at this point, it's difficult for me to imagine what I can actually say to you that would give you more than you've already received from the eloquence of those who preceded me here at the dais. But I would like to be able to share with you just a little bit of a perspective, just a little bit of a witness, perhaps, of how the story of Kristallnacht continues to have an impact on me as a religious leader in our community. And I'd like to begin this reflection by remembering first just a few words from Deuteronomy. Thus says the Lord, I have set before you life and death, blessings and curses. Choose life. Choose life so that you and your descendants may live. I'm thinking about windows. Windows. Ordinary as they are, commonplace as they are, windows are really quite miraculous things. They are walls, really, when you stop to think about it. They are boundaries. But boundaries with the peculiar characteristic of allowing us to see with equal clarity both the cold darkness that resides on one side of the wall and the warmth and light that lives on the other side. But as we also all know, windows are very, very fragile membranes, like pie crust, easily made, more easily broken. One thoughtlessly wielded baseball bat, one carelessly swung hammer, and crash. The street is filled with shattered shards, allowing that cold darkness to rush in and to utterly overwhelm the warmth and the light. We're here tonight, gathered in this room, precisely because 75 years ago this very thing happened. It happened. And not merely to one window. As we here all know all too well, on that night, all the streets of Central Europe were suddenly and unexpectedly filled with broken fragments. Broken fragments that became nothing more than a dim memory of what had once been windows. And the cold darkness rushed in, and for a time it seemed as though it would extinguish the light forever. Human memory, of course, is also a kind of window, a transparent wall that allows us to see with clarity, even when we would really rather not see it. It allows us to see with great clarity all the cold darkness of violence and cruelty, wickedness and hatred that the human heart is really, genuinely capable of, while at the very same time showing us with equal clarity the beauty and creativity, the love and the respect that the human spirit may aspire to. And only a thin, fragile membrane, only a thin membrane of memory stands between these two things. One careless moment of forgetfulness, and even here, even now on this night, the streets could be filled all over again with the fragments of one-time windows. And the light might be overcome by the darkness that is always there, just over there, on the other side of that looking glass. So here tonight, for the sake of ourselves and for the sake of our descendants, we choose life. We choose life by putting the window back in its place. Because tonight, sisters and brothers, together, we remember. We remember.
I have been in active ministry for 45 years. This may be one of the most significant moments in that 45 years because of who you are and because you've invited me to be in your company on this night of all nights. In my high school modern history class in the early 1960s, we never discussed the Holocaust, our Kristallnacht. I first learned about the Holocaust by reading the Diary of Anne Frank, as so many teenagers of that era did. And I could not comprehend the evil of the Holocaust. It did not make sense. And why wasn't anyone talking about it? And then the interviews on television and radio with Elie Wiesel, The Sound of Music, a visit to Anne Frank's house in Amsterdam, time spent in Austria and Germany, the stadium in Berlin, Martin Niemöller's church, Sachsenhausen, a trip to Israel, conversations with friends of the American Jewish Committee, Schindler's List, another trip to Israel, personal testimonies by some of you, Howard Reich's mother, the Holocaust museums in Jerusalem, Washington, D.C., and Skokie, and reading and more reading and much more listening. And after all of that, the Holocaust still does not make sense. But it has changed history. All of history, even my own personal history, and how I understand myself as a Christian. Perhaps my most influential mentor has been Franklin Littell, the fellow United Methodist minister who was a professor of religion at Temple University and an adjunct faculty member at Hebrew University in Jerusalem, a member of the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Council, and the founder of the Anne Frank Institute in Philadelphia. He spoke at Trinity United Methodist Church here in Wilmette back when I was the minister there, November 6th, 1988. Perhaps some of you were there. Here's what he said that has stayed with me, has riven my spirit to the bone. He said, I have wrestled with the truth that the Holocaust confronts Christianity with the most serious credibility crisis in its history. How can we deal with the truth that 6 million people, Jews, from whom we gained as gifts those treasures that the early Christians called the scriptures, the promises, the covenants, were murdered in the heart of Christendom by baptized Christians, Roman Catholics, Protestants, and Eastern Orthodox, who were never rebuked, let alone excommunicated? Everybody wants to say now that they were heathen, that they weren't of us. If that had been said publicly in 1936, there would have been a great truth there. But it would have required a courage or an insight the church leaders didn't have. Littell continues, Adolf Hitler died a church tax-paying Roman Catholic. Hermann Goering died a church tax-paying Protestant. How could this happen? How could the Pope and most of the bishops and the superintendents and the pastors float like dead fish, belly up with the mob, with the stream? Franklin Littell. How could this happen? That should be the first line of every confession of every Christian of every time and of every place. But we gather here knowing the answer. Christians and Jews and Muslims and Buddhists and Hindus and people of all faith traditions and no tradition at all. People of every nation and ethnicity know the answer. It appears in one form or another in each of the Holocaust museums. They came for the communists, and I didn't speak out because I wasn't a communist. They came for the trade unionists, and I didn't speak out because I wasn't a trade unionist. They came for the Jews, and I did not speak out because I wasn't a Jew. They came for me, and there was no one left to speak for me. Martin Niemöller, a Christian whose anti-Semitism was too deep-seated to be of any help to the Jews of his day, but whose confession serves as a warning for us all. So never again we speak tonight loudly and courageously for ourselves and for one another and for all the generations that follow. But tonight we must still remember the sound of shattering glass.
On this most important evening, we have gathered together a rather esteemed panel to talk about the relevance of Kristallnacht in our modern world. We have gathered a panel which will include our moderator, Dr. Robert Watson, a professor of history at Lynn University, Rabbi Herman Schulman, Dr. Rolf Weil, who is the president emeritus of Roosevelt University, and finally, and perhaps most importantly, Gerald Franks, who is a Kristallnacht witness.
For the panel, I wanted to start with a lesson, if you'll forgive a history professor, and then turn it over to our very distinguished panelists, and then I'll close with a lesson at the end. The lesson I'd like to start with is this. I think one of the many tragedies of Kristallnacht is that it does not often appear in a lot of our history curriculum today, K through 12, universities. It's oftentimes not found in our history textbooks, our international relations textbooks, even books on World War II. Why? I think on one hand, the absolute magnitude, the sheer magnitude of the horror and terror of the Holocaust are so large that many very important aspects of the larger Holocaust have been lost in the sheer magnitude of it. But what's more troubling, I think, and more tragic, is oftentimes when Kristallnacht is taught, it's presented often as a spontaneous outburst by some Nazi thugs, when it was anything but that. Case in point, from the time Hitler came to power in 33 through 38, there were a series of vicious measures designed to isolate and disenfranchise Germany's Jewish population, the most notable of them being the 1935 Nuremberg laws. These various measures did things such as set up boycotts of Jewish businesses. German businesses would not service Jewish customers or clients. Jews were not permitted the full rights of citizenship in Germany. Jews could not serve in the civil service. Property was confiscated. There were laws prohibiting marriage between Jews and quote-unquote Aryans. Extramarital relationships between the two groups were criminalized. But yet, during that period from 33 to 38, Joseph Goebbels, Hitler's propaganda minister, was not happy. He wanted something more. He wanted something worse. What he was unhappy about is largely from 33 to 38, despite how vicious these policies were, they were largely nonviolent. He wanted violence. And he found that excuse 75 years ago tonight. And you heard the story mentioned briefly earlier with Herschel Greenspan, a 17-year-old Jew of Polish ancestry. This story of Kristallnacht begins in late October 28th in specific of 1938. Roughly 17,000 Jews of Polish ancestry were forcibly rounded up, their property seized, and they were taken to Poland. The Polish government would not accept them, so they were literally dumped, dropped at the border. When the Polish government still refused, they ended up in the concentration camps. Goebbels finally found something that he could latch on to. Well, that 17-year-old was so furious that you heard a moment ago that he wanted to shoot the Nazi ambassador in Paris. He could not find him. He was not there at the time, so he shot a minor-level diplomat named Ernst von Roth. Von Roth died 2 days later on November 9th, and Hitler went to the funeral. And while Hitler was giving his oration at the funeral, Goebbels and other propagandists made their move. I would like to read an excerpt, and then we'll move to our guests, of the High Nazi Command, the orders that were given through the Gestapo on the evening of November 9th to show that it was not a spontaneous outburst. These are the direct orders delivered that night around 11 p.m. Number one, quote unquote, action against Jews, especially against their synagogues, will take place throughout the Reich shortly. They are not to be interfered with. Number two, so far as important archival material exists in synagogues, this is to be confiscated by immediate measures. Number three, preparations are to be made for the arrest of about 20,000 to 30,000 Jews in the Reich. Above all, well-to-do Jews are to be selected. Detailed instructions with what to do with them will follow through the weekend. We know that roughly 30,000 folks were shipped to Dachau, Buchenwald, and elsewhere. Number four, should Jews in possession of weapons be encountered in the course of this action, the sharpest measures are to be taken. And the list goes on and on and on, and ends with clear instructions not to harm any German property and for the police and the fire departments to stand down while this occurs. On November 12th, after Kristallnacht, Hermann Göring called a meeting with Goebbels and senior Nazi officials to decide what the next step was. They decided the next step would be to make Jews responsible for Kristallnacht, to make the Jews remaining in Germany pay a fee, a heavy fee to pay for the cleanup, to use the insurance money owed Jewish businesses and Jewish merchants would be confiscated and turned over to Nazi coffers. It was a unanimous vote that evening to move forward. And here's the closing remark from the Luftwaffe commander, Hermann Göring, on November 12, 1938. I shall close the meeting with these words. German Jewry shall, as punishment for their abominable crimes, and so forth, have to make a contribution of 1 billion marks to us. That will work. These swine won't commit another murder. Incidentally, gentlemen, I would like to say that I would not like to be a Jew in Germany. With that, let me turn this over to our distinguished panel. And the first question I would like to ask is for you to share your personal experiences as a witness to Kristallnacht. And Rabbi Shulman, if we could start with you.
On that night, I happened to be, as a student, officiating at the wedding of my good friend, Rabbi Günther Plaut, who got married that evening and had asked me to be his chazan. And I had chanted the Sheva Brachot, the 7 blessings, under the chuppah. And as I was finished, someone handed me a telegram. I was most surprised, of course. I opened the telegram and it read, Father in Dachau, save him, signed Mother. I had grown up in Munich. I knew about Dachau as a little suburb of Munich, sometime a place to which some of us Jewish Boy Scouts had taken our Sunday walks and so on. But I didn't know what was in Dachau, and I didn't know what my father, who was a decorated wounded sergeant, had fought in the German army for 4.5 years in the trenches, had done, that he would be in Dachau. The president of the board of the Hebrew Union College, of which I was a student at the time, was the international president of B'nai B'rith, and therefore had access to the State Department in Washington. And within 2 hours, I was given the following message from the State Department of the United States. Don't worry, nothing is being meant against your father. It is a mass action. None of us knew what a mass action was. None of us knew what a mass action would be in Dachau. Fortunately, because of my father's service for 4.5 years in the trenches and having been decorated, he was given the opportunity to be released months later, and he then found refuge in Brazil. But therefore, November the 9th is a day engraved in my life.
Mr. Franks, as an eyewitness who was there, could you share the story with us, please?
I started to really understand what was going on in the 30s in Germany when I saw some of the Polish people being arrested and literally thrown into trucks to be deported. I didn't really understand it completely, but November 9th straightened that out. The synagogue was sort of kitty corner to my gymnasium, my high school. And while we were watching the firemen, which were referred to earlier, maintaining the flames in the synagogue and keeping them from cutting over to the apartment buildings which were adjacent to the synagogue on both sides. Students that were in my class, as well as instructors, teachers that were going to the school, were passing us. The majority of them turned their heads. They were obviously embarrassed. These large, very spacious stores had broken windows in no time, and the looting started. I became more upset than I was already when I saw one of my colleagues from school, who I had known for a number of years and who was a quiet fellow and certainly no outspoken Nazi. But he also was attracted to this activity, and I saw him grab a chair out of the window of one of the destroyed windows, picked up this chair and threw it into the chandelier that was hanging in the window. Now, mind you, this was not just a lamp. It was a chandelier which probably had as many as 100 lights in it. And that was an unforgettable experience for me. It really broke something inside of me, as I had always considered myself a good Jew and also a good German. And the German part just fell apart. I went home on my bike and I told my parents, we have no business staying in this country because we're no longer Germans. let's get out of here. And my parents, within a very short time, agreed, and we left within a year from that evening. There was only one other experience which I'd like to tell you briefly about. My father's brother, my uncle, was arrested at 5 in the morning, and my aunt called us and urged us to leave our place and go into hiding, which we did. We went to my grandmother's apartment, and we stayed there for 10 days, never leaving the apartment and never turning on lights in the evening, sleeping wherever there was room, and that included the floor. And after 10 days, we decided to leave and went back to our own place, which had not been touched by anyone. The way these 30,000 people were arrested, I believe, varied from city to city or area to area. But in Berlin, the job of arresting was given to regular policemen. There were always 2, and they had a list of all the addresses where Jews lived. They went there and rang the bell, and if the bell was opened and there was a man available, they would arrest the man and take him with them. If there was no answer at the bell, they just went to the next apartment. They had instructions not to become violent. The Nazis made up for that in many, many ways, as you know.
Well, my friends, you've heard a lot of words, beautifully said and sincerely meant. But I submit to you that the problem that created Kristallnacht is a much more fundamental problem. And so let us ask ourselves the question, what caused it and what can prevent it? In terms of causation, forget about the assassination of von Rath by a distraught Polish Jew in Paris. That was simply the excuse for the events that followed. A more immediate cause took place in July of 1938, when there was a conference of 32 countries, including most of the major powers, in Evian, a city right across from the Swiss city of Lausanne on the French side. And that conference was called, in order to solve the Jewish problem, as it was called, to find ways of moving the Jews of Germany into other countries. The conference was a total failure. Again, beautiful words were spoken, but the powers of the world did nothing. Hitler was observing this, and the Nazis decided that what they had wanted was to get rid of the Jews, primarily to take their money and their assets, that wouldn't work because the Jews persisted in staying, and the world didn't want to take the Jews. And so the result was that Hitler decided only terror could move the Jews and make it possible to confiscate their property. So that brings me to the question of what is really the basic cause. Let me tell you that I think anti-Semitism is a virus. It is a virus that can lie dormant for years. It can also be reawakened. And what causes that reawakening of that virus? It is very simple. It's economic instability, depression, unemployment, inflation, and very great inequality in the distribution of income. And so, if you want to prevent a recurrence, don't just say never again, but make sure that the political powers in the world are fully aware of the fact that we need economic stability We need a high level of employment and a low level of inflation. Unless these basic conditions are met, I submit to you that virus will come again in probably a different form and maybe in different places. But don't forget.
In the brief time remaining, I'd like to ask each of the gentlemen to just offer a brief word on what they believe to be the relevance in terms of the lessons of Kristallnacht today with regard to anti-Semitic violence, intolerance here at home and around the world. Rabbi, if you could please start.
Well, the whole question, of course, as to how the future of the Jewish people could be, shall we say, guaranteed or safe, is a question that has many answers, but I have one in particular, and I think it was demonstrated here tonight. Among the people that spoke most movingly about the meaning of this evening and its impact on not only us, but the rest of the world, were two clergymen and a sister. I've often felt that had there been in Germany any kind of a possibility of the religious leaders of the time to be in contact with each other, and not only with each other, but also with the rabbis of the time, that maybe through them an atmosphere could have been created in Germany too, which would have prevented the outbreak of the worst of the terrible things that have happened there. I am completely convinced, and have devoted my life to a great extent to this kind of problem, that we, who are the religious leaders of a given community, need to be in concert with each other, need to trust each other, need to know each other, need to talk about our various religious commitments in such a way that we would help create an atmosphere in which the good and the true and the honest and the sensitive and the peaceful would be stressed, and all the other aspects which often mar the religious life of every religious community would be, at a minimum, if it not altogether, be repressed. So I would think that what is happening, for instance, here in Chicago, where people of various faiths come together regularly to discuss the issues of the day in an attempt to show to each other that they are all committed to the same ultimate great values and devoted to their effective teaching and their effective work in their communities, that is the best that I know of that will help Jews, help me, help all of us to have a future in which what happened in Germany in the 30s and thereafter could never be repeated.
Interfaith dialogue. An interfaith trialogue among the three great monotheistic faiths. Yes, Mr. Franks.
This is a very difficult question for an individual to answer, even an individual that has had some unforgettable experiences. I think the number of people present here tonight are evidence that Jewish people are becoming more and more aware of what really happened. And I'd like to thank Al Gruen, I don't know where he is now, for organizing this. I think it's very important that as Jews, we become aware of what our own history is and try to do something about problems that develop. I've been asked in the last few weeks to address a college group which consisted almost entirely of non-Jews. And I must tell you, what those young people wanted to know was unbelievable. Jews don't know all the things that happened. It's understandable. But non-Jews have an even much more difficult time. And when we have new extreme right or Nazi groups coming into existence in many countries in Europe, and we have some of that here. I saw some statistics on it. They're absolutely shocking. So I think we have to be very much aware of what happened and be prepared to act. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Weil.
The majority of Jews and non-Jews in Germany did not believe that what Hitler said in his book Mein Kampf would come about. It was so easy to say, that's not possible. That couldn't happen. And it did happen. And to bring this up to the current day, there are people, political leaders, regardless of what the majority might be, in Iran, who have promised to destroy the state of Israel. I hope that people do not make the mistake of thinking, well, that's only words. When people say they're going to destroy Jews, unfortunately, they mean it. And so my suggestion is, especially in the present situation, watch very carefully what is going on right now in Geneva. I am very worried that the desire for peace, which we all have, could lead us into a kind of appeasement of the Iranians, and that in turn can be a very dangerous thing for the Jewish community in the world.
I'd like to close with a brief lesson to wrap this up and bring it up to the relevance. And the lesson has to do with the bystander. As you heard Mr. Frank say, there were countless Germans who were not a part of the Nazi Party in '38 who got caught up in whatever was happening with the violence and terror that night and started breaking glass. It started attacking people, countless. There was a large population in Germany before Kristallnacht, during Kristallnacht, and after Kristallnacht who did nothing, who were passive. One of the things the United States did after Kristallnacht was recall our ambassador, but we failed to release and open up a lot of our immigration laws, making it almost impossible for Jews to come here. 1 year later, when the SS St. Louis left with over 900 souls on board for Havana, the ship was not even allowed to dock in Havana. It had to drop anchor in the harbor. And once again, Goebbels had set it up as a propaganda ploy by sending Nazi agents to Cuba and elsewhere in the Caribbean before the St. Louis arrived, telling the people there that the Germans were dumping their diseased folks from mental institutions and criminals. So by the time the St. Louis arrived, the ship was turned back. Before the ship went back, it twice made appeals of the United States, and twice the United States turned the ship away. It appealed to Canada. Canada turned the ship away. Had it not been for the heroism of the Nazi captain, Gustav Schroeder, who's now among the righteous in Yad Vashem. Schroeder threatened to scuttle the ship on the rocks off the British coast rather than take it back to Germany. Only at that threat were the passengers allowed to disembark in countries other than Germany. Most of them survived the concentration. However, several that went to Holland, the Netherlands, and places like that, France, when they were overrun, they ended up dying in the crematoria. I'll say this in closing. From 1945 on, the Jewish diaspora around the world has had a friend in the United States. Whether it's the work of the Holocaust Museum here or this synagogue, or Jewish social organizations and political organizations such as AIPAC and the AJC, Hadassah, ORT, and others, or whether it's American political support. From Harry Truman on, Israel has had support from the United States. And it's been bipartisan support. In this day and age of hyperpartisanship, one of the last vestiges of bipartisanship is support for Israel. Ronald Reagan, a conservative Republican, and Lyndon Johnson, a liberal Democrat, were both darn good for Israel. And some of the recent measures to fund the Iron Dome system, or this past year when the President allocated a $3 billion loan guarantee and a $3 billion national security package to Israel, it received almost unanimous bipartisan support in both chambers of Congress. And the ironic story to all of this was one of the greatest champions, I believe, in the history of U.S.-Israeli relations was the most unlikely person. The last American president to lack a college degree, a man who was raised in a racist and anti-Semitic household, and that would be Harry Truman. A man that Dr. Weizmann, Ambassador Abba Eban, and David Ben-Gurion all referred to as Moses, or the American Cyrus, in reference to Cyrus the Great, the first to bring Jews back to Jerusalem, for what he did. Truman is the one who improved the conditions in the DP camps throughout Europe. Truman is the one that made the British stand down from their policy of intercepting Jewish craft trying to make it to Palestine. Truman is the one who provided food, medicine, clothing for folks not only in the camps, but in Palestine. Truman is the one who was the first world leader to recognize the State of Israel on May 14th, 1948 at 6:11 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Let me close with two quotes about Harry Truman, just to show you that no matter how bad it gets, just when you think it's hopeless, there is hope. When Harry Truman was running in 1948, he didn't stand a prayer. His own party did not want to nominate him. He was challenged on the right by Strom Thurmond, the Dixiecrat. Before he became a Republican, he was challenged on the left by Henry Wallace. And the night of the convention in 1948, Truman got up and unveiled his platform, and it called for massive Jewish immigration, support for a homeland, and a number of other issues that were labeled a Zionist program. He also supported civil rights and wanted what would later become the 1964 Civil Rights Act. When the platform was announced, when the agenda was announced, Strom Thurmond got up and walked out of the Democratic Convention, taking Southern delegates with him. He was stopped at the door by a reporter who said, "Governor Thurmond," he was then the governor of South Carolina, "why are you walking out?" Because Truman's platform says just a little bit more than FDR's platform used to say. And Thurmond said, "Yes, quote unquote, but here's the difference. FDR only ever talked about it, did nothing, but that SOB Truman means it and will do something." That night, in his diary, Harry Truman wrote the following entry that night in his diary: of the quote-unquote Zionist program and civil rights, of those two issues, he said, quote unquote, "Of these two issues, I will lose the White House. So be it, right thing to do," end quote. That's the kind of moral leadership. The last quote and story for the night is when Truman was leaving office in January of 1953, his approval rating was in the low 20s in the Gallup poll, the least popular president in the history of the Gallup poll from 1933 up. And as he was leaving, basically carrying his own bags to the train, his aides were trying to cheer him up, saying, "Mr. President, by dropping the bomb, you saved American lives. Mr. President, you created NATO. Mr. President, you expanded health care." They were trying to cheer him up. Then they touched on something. They said, "Mr. President, thousands and thousands of Jews made it out of the DP camps and came into the U.S. under your presidency." Truman said, "What's the number?" They said, "Over 390,000. And Truman shook his head and said, "Not enough." They said, "What number did you want?" And Truman said, quote unquote, "As many as possible." With the support of organizations like this synagogue, like the museum, like Jewish social organizations, with the existence of the Jewish state, and with the strong support of the United States, Never Again finally has some teeth. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
We will now have another important part of our program, a candle lighting ceremony. And if I may, I'm going to invite a number of people up to participate. So will the following folks come up? Marion Gruen, Fritzie Fritzell, Margot Schlesinger, Fern Steinfeld, Paul Sternfeld, and finally, Ziggy Fight.
Shochein bameromi am tzeimen uchane chona tachat kanefei hashchina b'malot kedoshim uteyorim kezor horokiyo mashirim nadri shemot kol acheinu b'nei Yisrael anoshim nashim v'tov שנטבחו ושנחנקו ושנשרפו ושנהרגו על ידי הנאצים הרשעים יימח שמם בגן עדן תהא מנוחתם הסתירם בסדר כנפיך ליעלמים וצרור בצרור החיים את נשמותיהם אדוני הוא נחלתם וינוחו בשלום על משכבותיהם ונאמר Amen.
Thank you. You may be seated.
It's been a very moving and wonderful. I wouldn't have missed a moment of this discussion this evening. So first I'd like to sing a song that I think says a lot that's in our hearts.
This land is mine, God gave this land to me. This brave and ancient land to me. And when the morning sun reveals her hills and plains, then I see a land where children can run free. So take my hand and walk this land with me, and walk this lovely land with me. Though I am just a man, when you are by my side, with the help of God, I know I can be strong.
Selection that Dana Brown played so beautifully for us is Meditation by Ernst Bloch, one of the German composers who ended up emigrating along with some of the other composers we've presented this evening, including Herbert Fromm. Other composers in that realm were Kurt Weill, etc., those who came from their German background. Before we close out this program this evening, I wanted to sing something that I hope is near and dear to all of you in a certain sense, and something not necessarily from a religious connotation, but as everyone has spoken so beautifully as to the need to speak up. I feel like this is the other side of it. So that we don't end up alone, I'd like to sing You'll Never Walk Alone by Richard Rodgers from Carousel. When you walk through a storm, hold your head up high, and don't be afraid of the dark. At the end of the storm is a golden sky and a sweet silver song